Okay, so these are just some random notes on Lab02 to help you get through it. So right away I'd recommend for all the circuits you're building to run a wire from the 3.3 volt node on your Raspberry Pi breakout, the 3v3 pin, to the red line, and a wire from the ground pin to the blue line. That way you can distribute power all across the board. So when you have that, the first task is going to be to just put a red LED into the pin 4, the GPIO pin 4. Then you're going to run some tests and count how many flashes it has. They're all randomized, so you can't use my number of flashes. Then later on, you're going to then build multiple LEDs, a red one to pin 4, a white one to pin 17, and a blue one to pin 27, and do similar things. The next thing is you're going to have to build some switches. Now, switches are just pieces of matter which basically separate two conductors, and when you push on them, they connect those two conductors, so basically they complete the circuit. But in order to incorporate them into a Raspberry Pi or any sort of real digital computer, you need to add a few other parts with it in order to make it work properly. And there's two classes of switches that you can make. The first is a pull up and the second is a pull down, and we'll go into those. Now whenever you stick these little tiny switches into the breadboard, pay close attention to how I'm actually setting up the pins here. You can see the 4 pins are actually sitting 2 on either side of that gap right there. So the first circuit we're going to build with this switch is actually what we call a pull-up circuit. And so that's because there's a resistor on it which connects to the 3.3 volt line, or it pulls the switch up to a high voltage. So you're going to take your 100 kilo ohm resistor, brown, black, yellow, from one leg of the switch go to the 3.3 volt line. Then if we go back to the schematic, the other leg of the switch should then have a wire go from it to ground. And I'm going to do that right here, and I'm going to struggle with it because sometimes wires just don't go into breadboards nicely. That's a fact of life you got to make peace with. Let me do that. That sucked, okay. Alright, that's in. It's not pretty, but the electrons don't really care. Okay. Now, we have to do one final piece with this switch to make it actually connect to the Raspberry Pi. There's a wire that's going to go from between the resistor and the switch to GPIO pin 23. So I'm going to take a long orange wire, and while we're here you can also see that I have 2 wires, one running from the red from one side to the other and one running from the blue to the one side to the other. That way I have 3.3 and ground connected all over my board nicely. So this orange wire is going to go from where it was in the schematic, that point we pointed out, to GPIO pin 23. So now we have a full switch. This is the schematic, and what you just saw is it implemented in real life. Now we can run a hardware test case on it where we're going to watch our LEDs and push the button in an exaggerated sense whenever the red LED is on. You can see right there. If you do that, the cat soup tutor will then read it and see, oh, your circuit looks good, everything's all right.